Welcome to the Binge-Worthy Writing Podcast,
where we take a look at some of your favorite stories and we discuss what tricks, tips, and techniques make them bingeable.
I'm Jonathan. I'm a published short story author and screenwriter who really enjoys writing TV pilots, several of which have been under consideration by production companies, and I love telling stories.
And I'm Jackie. I'm a story consultant and sensitivity reader for Jonathan's scripts as well as for other writers, and I love talking about stories and how they can help create inclusive spaces for others. And here we take a look at a variety of TV shows, some of which you know and love,
and others you might not but should consider checking out.
Since this is our first season, we thought that we should dedicate this entire season to discussing pilot episodes.
The first episode that sells a TV series and makes the audience want to watch more.
Each of our podcast episodes this season will cover a different element that a TV pilot could use to become a successful bingeable story.
Now that you know what makes us binge-worthy, let's talk about what makes a pilot binge-worthy. And some pilots require an ensemble.
Occasionally, a story revolves around a team rather than one specific protagonist. In screenwriting, we call this team an ensemble. Having an ensemble cast is a great way to add community dynamics to your story as well as add diversity. But with a large cast of characters comes a challenge of how to introduce them all. And today we're looking at how Brooklyn Nine-Nine tackled this challenge.
As many of you know, Brooklyn Nine-Nine is a half-hour police procedural comedy series. It ran for a total of 8 seasons and was a completely original concept, not based on any previous intellectual property.
So what we'll do now is we'll do a dramatic reading of the scene from the pilot that introduces the ensemble and cast of characters.
Which we'll be doing through fair use for the purposes of educating our audience.
And every time something stands out to one of us, we'll stop the reading and talk about it.
We'll focus on what makes the storytelling stand out as excellent, but sometimes we might discuss the differences between what's written in the pilot and what got filmed.
And then when we're done, we'll recap our takeaways.
Also, quick disclaimer, even though Jackie and I are big fans of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, we might make some mistakes about the show's lore. But really, we're here to just give our take on just these scenes and what makes them compelling. And we'll do our best to avoid spoiling anything about the series that doesn't happen in the pilot.
And with that out of the way, let's get right into it.
For our first scene that we have today, Jackie will be our narrator. I will be reading for Jake and the electronics store owner, and Jackie will be reading for Amy.
Untitled Gore Sure Project Pilot. Cold open. Exterior Sammy's electronics store, Brooklyn, day. Police tape blocks off the store. Uniformed cops and crime technicians catalog the crime scene.
This job is eating me alive. I can't breathe anymore.
Interior Sammy's electronics store, day. We start close on Detective Jake Peralta, Andy Sandberg.
I spent all these years trying to be the good guy, the man in the white hat. I'm not becoming like them. I am them.
What are you doing, weirdo? Reveal. Jake was speaking into a video camera that's attached to 10 TV monitors, all filled with his image. Detective Amy Santiago, Melissa Fumero, watches annoyed.
All right, real quick, I'd like to stop there and do one takeaway. So first of all, this is the cold open of the series. This is our very first scene. And some of you might be wondering, why are we choosing this scene to introduce the ensemble? Because we're really only getting introduced to 2 of the main characters. And the reason for that is when you're writing any ensemble, the trick is that you need to have one character who's the focus character. That if your audience sort of doesn't know whose perspective to zoom in on, they have one character to kind of focus in on in case they sort of get lost in the storytelling. So in terms of ways this has been done before, like for instance in Ocean's 11, you have Danny Ocean as your main focus character. In Guardians of the Galaxy, you've got Star-Lord. And this doesn't even have to be the person in charge of the ensemble. We learned that Jake here is not even the highest ranking detective in his precinct. And right here, we're opening up on him as the focus character. So, and you see this kind of happen in a lot of comedies. So for instance, in The Good Place, you have Eleanor as your focus character. She's not really in charge of anything. In The Office, like that's an ensemble. You could argue who the focus character is. I think a lot of people would choose Jim, but he's not the main guy. So this is a pretty common strategy in a lot of comedies. And so we're focusing in on our focus character before we see how they introduce the rest of the ensemble.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like an anchor for your audience throughout the story.
Yeah. Okay.
Detective Amy Santiago, Melissa Fumero, watches, annoyed.
I'm doing the best speech from Donnie Brasco. Actually,
He points to the monitors.
10 of me are doing the best speech from Donnie Brasco.
Then on all 10 monitors.
Sup?
Get it together, man, all 10 of you. Jake starts playing with all the electronic equipment. Amy reviews her notes with owner Ahmed. Store was hit about 2 hours ago. Perps disabled the alarm. A drum machine goes off loudly.
Sorry, my bad.
They mostly took tablets and cameras. I'd like a list of your employees, anyone who had access to the store. I'd also like to apologize for my partner. His parents didn't give him enough attention. Music starts from the karaoke machine, and Jake starts singing to Believe by Cher.
Do you believe in life after love?
Dude, seriously?
I know, not my first choice either, but it's stuck. Got any other songs, Ahmed? No, it's broken. You want it? 150 for you, works perfect. You literally just said it was broken. I think this robbery was a smash and grab. I really believe it was a smash and grab. Oh.
Really? Cher? I think it was an inside job. Prove me wrong.
Real quick, I just want to talk about a departure here. So they don't actually do this singing, probably for copyright reasons.
Probably too expensive.
I hope that this doesn't present any problems for our podcast, but this is what was written in the pilot, so that's what we're going with here. But this does really highlight the first point that I want to talk about when it comes to an ensemble. So we don't have the whole team with us, but we do have Jake and Amy. And one thing about an ensemble is that it needs to have diversity in order to work. Now, a lot of times people talk about diversity. We're talking about ethnic diversity, or we're talking about diversity of neurotype or diversity of physical ability, or something like that. And all of that is important to have in an ensemble because that's a reflection of the world that we live in. However, at the very base minimum, your ensemble needs to have some kind of diversity, because otherwise what you essentially have is just one character that's copied and pasted a bunch of times. There needs to be a diversity of personality, and there needs to be a diversity of problem-solving abilities. Because if your team agrees on every single thing, there's going to be no tension, and there's also not going to be any sort of natural... It won't feel natural, because everyone will have the same strengths and weaknesses if they approach every problem the same way. And it's natural that in a team that functions as a unit, that one person's strengths are going to cover for another person's weaknesses and vice versa. And so what we see here is that Jake is incredibly immature and Amy is professional. The more you see of Amy, the more you realize that she's professional to a fault. But, we won't get into that here. And these two clash and present a certain amount of tension, which is interesting to the audience, but they also show how they tackle these problems sort of differently. And Jake is, it looks like he's goofing off, but he's secretly sort of approaching the problem in his own way, we'll find out, which is different from Amy's very direct and very professional way, which is an important ingredient to have to our ensemble. Do you want to go off of that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that more naturally you do see this in comedy, in part because comedic moments happen with contrast, right? Like the straight man, somebody that's really goofy. But also, I think you end up, without having some level of diversity in the personalities, you do end up limiting yourself in terms of like potential like storylines or B-plots and like all these other things that could be interesting and a natural source of conflict, kind of like you're alluding to with tension and things like that, right? And definitely just not as interesting if there isn't any variety.
Yeah, 100%. So could you pick it up with, I think it was an inside job?
I think it was an inside job. Prove me wrong.
A challenge? Is this a challenge? I love challenges. The door and the register were both forced and they tripped a motion sensor, i.e. not an inside job.
Or it's an inside job meant to look like a smash and grab.
Sorry, we're looking for 3 white males, one of whom has tat sleeves on both arms.
And how do you know that, dare I ask?
I had a confidential informant on the inside. He spent years right here, in this sale bin, watching, learning, waiting. His code name is...
Holds up teddy bear.
Fuzzy Cuddle Bear. and he's a nanny cam.
Jake plugs the bear into the bank of TVs. We see 3 white thugs robbing the place. Ugh, you got lucky.
You know what they say, luck is 95% talent, 5% being awesome.
No one's ever said that.
Well, we did it, Fuzzy. We got him. You can come home now.
As the bear.
I don't know if I can. I've been undercover so long. I don't even know who I am anymore. I've done terrible things.
All right.
I strangled the Mr. Potato Head with my bare hands. Oh, God, what have I become?
End of cold open. That was hard not to laugh at.
So yeah, this is our first sort of taste of Jake and Amy, and these are 2 members of our ensemble. One thing I wanted to bring up was that regarding differences in problem solving, Amy's very to-the-point nature caused her to question the manager, and she kind of got almost a little bit confrontational, like immediately suspecting an inside job. But with Jake, it looked like he was playing around with all of the electronics, but that kind of allowed him to find the one electronic that was in the store that captured the robbery. And there are some differences in dialogue. Part of that probably has to do with, rewriting jokes and getting it to be, just right for the pilot, or, sometimes comedic actors will improvise a joke so well that that's the take that gets used. So there are some lines that are different from what got filmed. So another thing that this cold open addresses is that even though Jake is wildly immature, he's actually a good detective. And otherwise, someone that immature would not be hired by a police force. So just having him immediately show up to a crime scene and solve the case better than someone who's acting professional actually gives a justification for why he's there, which is an important plot hole to close immediately, because otherwise it becomes a story of why is this guy even around.
Yeah, you can't suspend disbelief.
But yeah, his talent is what allows him to stick around and be kind of like a thorn in Amy's side, and that becomes fuel for what makes this ensemble sort of click and how they get on each other's nerves.
Yeah. I also think two differences between what we're reading now and what actually got filmed for the pilot were kind of interesting changes. So one was that he actually explains in the filmed pilot what he was doing, that he was thinking that amongst all the electronics, there must have been one that was on, as a display, and that, he was just searching to see which one maybe got some footage. So that I thought was interesting, where it's like, well, you might have to spell it out just a tiny bit to your point of why this guy is a good detective for the audience, that he actually knows what's going on. And then I think the other one was when he's still talking as the teddy bear, and he actually starts flirting a little bit with Amy, oh, I've never known the touch of a woman, I think is what was actually filmed. And then that's when she actually says in the pilot, all right, kind of dismissing, his, I guess, his flirting or whatever it was, which I think maybe it's because the bias of having seen the rest of the pilot and the series, but I think it could have been a really subtle way of showing, okay, within this ensemble, they're at odds, but also some of that tension could maybe be a little bit romantic or sexual tension a little bit, because he's flirting with her and stuff like that. So I thought maybe I could be reading into it, but it could just kind of be another subtle hint as to how they go together within this larger group.
Yeah, for sure. I think that was definitely hinted at, especially since it's established in the pilot that the reason that they're trying to close more cases than the other is because if he wins, then she has to go out on a date with him. That's stated up front in the pilot episode, so
so not a coincidence.
The cold open was very much alluding to that. So now, with those 2 members established, including our focus character here, we're going to shift to a scene a little bit later where Terry, who is the highest ranking officer before Captain Holt comes in, he is called into the captain's office to sort of give him a lowdown. And this is sort of similar to the setup that we spoke about last week with Wednesday, where there's some exposition going on and there's one character that has the information, there's another character that needs the information. Here, the setup that they're using is commanding officer is asking to be briefed. And so the exposition comes off as somewhat natural in that you would expect there to be a briefing in a police proceeding like this. And so this is how the ensemble gets introduced. And so Jackie will be reading Terry's lines. I will be reading Holt's lines. And Jackie will be voicing any sort of female characters that come into play, and I'll be voicing any male characters that come into play. And I will also be the narrator. Interior Holt's office, later. The floor is covered in unpacked boxes. Terry stands. Sergeant, you were in the 18th with me, though you were significantly...
Fatter, sir. They called me Terry Titties because I had large...
Titties, yes. I remember. I never liked that nickname, though, to be fair, it was accurate. Says here you're on administrative leave.
A year ago, my wife and I had twin baby girls, Cagney and Lacey. Ever since, I've kind of clenched up, lost my edge. There was an incident.
Flashback. Interior department store, night, 1 year ago. Terry and Jake, guns drawn, in a deserted store.
You go in first. I'm feeling jumpy.
What? You always go in first. Look at you, whose biceps don't go in second. There's a bang. Terry screams and fires 10 shots at a figure with its arms out, totally obliterating a mannequin. I think he's dead. Back to scene.
It's been a year and I haven't...
Holt holds up his hand. No more. Tell me about your detective squad. Terry motions to 3 middle-aged detectives.
Scully, Hitchcock, and Daniels. They're pretty much worthless, but they make good coffee.
Copy that.
Now the good ones. Rosa Diaz, tough, smart, hard to read, and scary as hell.
I'd like to stop here. There's actually a difference in what got filmed that actually elevates what's happening here. So the screenplay here implies that they're both just sitting at a desk, just chatting with one another. But what got filmed is slightly better visual storytelling, where Terry sort of motions Holt to the door of the office that has a glass window in it, and they kind of like look out at the office. And so you can actually see all the people that they're talking about just before these flashbacks happen. And so, for instance, here they were talking about Rosa. And so right as they were talking about Rosa, the camera would cut to Rosa at her computer, and they're talking about her being tough, and she's smacking the computer, getting visibly more and more angry to just kind of heighten what is being said about her in the moment. And so that really is kind of like the icing on the cake of like what makes this different from just bland exposition. Because we could have these two characters talking to one another, and the fact that there's flashbacks even is good because it shows the character rather than tells about it. But the fact that they're sort of cutting away to these characters as they're being observed now adds to that even more.
Yeah, like they're in their natural habitat, and so you can also see like, oh, okay, they're sizing everybody up, sort of. Oh, I will say one more thing. It's a simple one, but when he says that the three people he names are useless, you just see them all chatting and like having coffee, like whereas everybody else is like at a computer or looking through files on the phone, you're like doing more work related things. So that was like also a simple way of doing that. Yeah.
Also, while sort of riffing off our theme of diversity, we also have another set of opposites now, where Terry, who's played by actor and former NFL player Terry Crews, who has gigantic muscles, he's being portrayed as a scaredy cat because he's a family man. And immediately after his deal got introduced, we sort of cut over to Rosa, who is perpetually angry all the time and super hyper aggressive.
Good point, yeah.
And so we have two opposites in personality in that way. And that adds to a whole bunch of humor as well. So we keep layering the opposites here. Could you go from the line Rosa Diaz?
Rosa Diaz, tough, smart, hard to read, and scary as hell.
Flashback. Interior bullpen. Christmas time. Rosa storms up to Hitchcock.
Tell me who has me for Secret Santa.
No, that takes all the fun out of it. Rosa stares daggers at him. He crumbles. It's Scully. He got you a scarf. It's blue and ugly. I'll make him return it. Back to scene. Terry gestures to Charles at his desk.
Charles Boyle. He's a grinder. Not the most brilliant detective, but he works harder than anyone else. He's not physically gifted.
Flashback. Interior bullpen. Coffee station. A month ago. Charles unwraps a muffin, then drops it on the ground. Aw, man, my muffin! As he picks it up, he smacks his head on the desk. Ow! My head! My muffin and my head! Back to scene. Just talking about differences, like I'm pretty sure that Joe Latrullo like riffed on that for a little while, and
He just kept repeating it back and forth, and what actually was recorded, it was so funny.
yeah. I think he riffed on that for a little while and kind of elevated that.
Oh, and then he's like, "Oh, I stepped on my muffin. Oh, my muffin, my head, and I stepped on my muffin."
Yeah, hilarious stuff. Yeah. So back to scene. Terry motions to Amy at her desk.
Amy Santiago, first girl cop in a family of cops. Gets underestimated because of her looks, so she's always trying to prove she's tough.
Flashback, interior break room, a week ago. Amy puts hot sauce on her sandwich. She looks up to see Scully watching her.
You think I can't handle this much hot sauce? I can handle way more than this.
She empties the hot sauce onto her sandwich and takes a bite.
In your face.
I didn't say anything. Back to scene. So that scene was a little bit different too.
Yeah, quite.
So with Amy, we see a little bit less than perhaps what we've seen from the others because we already met her in the cold open, but we do see it kind of sort of peels back layers of her motivation and level of determination.
She's at least competitive, which I think also goes with the bet and stuff like that you were alluding to. I would also describe like what it is that's different, right? So she, in what was actually filmed, the reasoning that's given is that she's one of like 8 kids and she has 7 brothers. And so she's always trying to like prove that she's tough because she was around a lot of boys, which I think is maybe a better way of saying it than like what they actually wrote here, like girl cop. Mm-hmm. And the rest is the same, like her needing to prove herself with the hot sauce.
Yeah, good catch. Back to scene.
She and Peralta have some big bet over who gets more arrests this year. At first I objected, but ever since the bet, their numbers have gone way up.
Tell me about Peralta.
Jacob Peralta is my best detective. He likes putting away bad guys, and he loves solving puzzles. The only puzzle he hasn't solved is how to grow up.
That's very well put.
I've talked a lot about Jake in my departmentally mandated therapy sessions.
Holt nods, walks over to Terry. They finally gave me my shot, Terry. You know my history. You know how important this is to me. This precinct is doing fine, but I want to make it the best in Brooklyn, and I need your help.
Absolutely, sir. Where do we start?
Holt looks out the window at Jake, who's trying to impress Amy by breakdancing. She stares at him for a beat, then throws a bagel at him. We start with him. End of Act 1. Cool. So this gets into a couple of different things. So what we're seeing now is another set of opposites, which is Holt and Jake, where Jake, the show all but came out and confirmed that he has ADHD in
very stereotyped
way.
Very
stereotyped and immature version of that. And the show heavily implies that Captain Holt is on the autism spectrum, and in a perhaps stereotyped way, he is presented as very rigid and very, fastidious, which for something like a police captain could actually work on the job. And so you kind of see those two personalities being at odds, but the captain is the one who has the authority. And so you actually see that they're sort of setting up a dynamic of, oh, these two are going to be in tension with one another. They're going to be butting heads. And the whole pilot is kind of them butting heads with one another, which again, has to do with differences in personality and differences in the way that they solve problems.
Sure.
And that is, again, really important stuff to have in an ensemble, because if everybody's the same, then why do you have a team? It could just be one person.
For sure. Yeah, especially if there's a power dynamic like that, right? Like obviously one is in charge of the precinct and stuff like that. It makes sense for that already to be attention, but I think it makes it even more interesting, but also somewhat believable that you would have different personalities in different positions, right? Like meaning they have different drive, right? Like I don't know that Jake would do the work that he would need to like be promoted multiple times and be in charge of a group of people. Like that doesn't seem like something he would do. So I think they all kind of go together with like fleshing out like everyone's position based on what they're good at, like, what their personality is, like inclinations and stuff like that. So yeah, it seems like it makes it a little bit more believable, especially when the comedy is like very out there and very goofy. I think these characters end up like grounding things because they're believable figures outside of the comedy.
Yeah. Also, from a writing standpoint, I want to backtrack on something. So we mentioned that Amy kind of got a little bit less than the others because she was introduced in the pilot. Jake got the least out of all of the main players because like he is already our focus character. So even though Holt needed to be introduced to him in order for the briefing to make sense, he was sort of introduced in a very sort of cursory way because the audience already got a very thorough introduction to him in the cold open. And so that's how this scene works in conjunction with the cold open to introduce the main players of the ensemble. Also, they did an interesting trick where because Holt is setting himself up to butt heads with Jake in order to improve the precinct, they talked about him last because he would probably be the person that would be talked about the most in terms of, starting to quote unquote correct some problems.
Sure.
And positioning him last for the purposes of teasing that, there are going to be problems ahead, and then ending Act 1, which by 2013 standards, that would be cut to commercial. That's kind of like a little mini cliffhanger that teases that, hey, there's going to be some tension in this ensemble, and, these two people are going to be butting heads.
Yeah. I would also say that in terms of the different kinds of going back to the diversity topic that we were talking about, it is interesting to see like the different kinds that they do bring up, right? Because like to your point, sometimes there can be a very narrow understanding of what diversity in a group of people might be, right? And so like we've already seen like personalities that are very different to one another. The casting in terms of like the people that are actually on the show, like when it's filmed, is pretty broad in terms of representation of like folks with like, I don't know, different skin colors, heights. Like we learn that there are different backgrounds, like their names and stuff like that.
Which you would expect for New York City.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's set in one of the most diverse cities on the eastern seaboard of the U.S.
For sure. I think that's a big reason why it doesn't feel very forced as well. Like it's obviously making sense for the demographics of the place. I do think that it does like make it more natural within having to suspend disbelief that a police force might be like this, this diverse, just because that's another subculture, sort of thing. But that makes sense. And they're not there to be like, you're here to be the female, like you're here to be like the Latina, you're here to be like the person that's this age or something, and they do have like an age range as well in terms of like that kind of diversity too. And it was done in a way where it's like fairly natural and people aren't there just to be like caricature of something, minus maybe some of the neurotype stuff. But I do think that's a newer layer of diversity to go mainstream recently. So this was like more than 10 years ago. But yeah, I overall do like it.
Yeah, I would agree with all points on that. So with that, let's recap our takeaways. So one thing that you would need to do in order to write an ensemble is to pick a focus character who's going to lead your ensemble. Doesn't need to be the actual leader of the ensemble, although that could help depending on what you're writing. In addition to that, what you want to do is introduce them and also make sure to have someone who is sort of their opposite. You want to make sure your ensemble has as much diversity as possible because that's what makes an ensemble interesting. Your ensemble could be ethnically diverse, could be diverse in terms of neurotype, it could be in terms of gender, sexual orientation, the list goes on. But again, at minimum, what you need is diversity of personality and diversity of how these folks solve problems, which means that they're going to have different strengths and different weaknesses. Like that's the minimum you need in order to write an interesting ensemble. And then, on top of that, it would enrich your story to add extra layers of diversity, like the other things that we talked about as well.
Yeah, and again, we touched on this in an earlier episode, but the visual storytelling is also part of like introducing, I think, for this episode, the cast, like seeing them in context, interacting with one another, and showing those differences, like you were highlighting.
Yeah. And another thing, we touched on this when we did our Wednesday episode, but If you ever need to introduce a lot of things all at once in a way that kind of resembles exposition, you have to make sure that the info dump makes sense. So here we have a commanding officer asking to be briefed by another officer that he trusts. And so when you introduce like a lot of people all at once, you got to make sure that info dump does make sense within context. And it does work here. If you want to learn more about that, maybe check out our episode on Wednesday to learn a little bit more about how they do that. All right, with that in mind, why don't you take us out?
We hope these discussions can help writers of all walks to help diversify the media landscape even more.
I'm Jonathan.
I'm Jackie.
Thank you for tuning in, and take care and stay safe.
Bye.